September 1870. The Bay of Biscay. Her Majesty's ship captain is steaming home with the Channel Squadron after summer exercises off Cape Finisterre. She carries 500 men, including her designer Captain Cowper Coles and the teenage son of the First Lord of the Admiralty. At 3 o'clock in the morning, a sudden squall strikes the fleet. Every ship rolls heavily in the darkness. Only one capsizes. Within 15 minutes, the captain has vanished beneath the Atlantic swells. Of her entire crew, 18 men survive by clinging to wreckage until dawn. 480 drown, including Coles himself, including the First Lord's 17-year-old son, Leonard Childers, including Captain Hugh Burgoyne, a Victoria Cross holder who reportedly refused a lifebelt and went down with his command. The disaster would become the worst peacetime loss in Royal Navy history. But the real scandal was not the capsizing itself. The real scandal would emerge in the oak-paneled rooms of the Admiralty headquarters in Whitehall, where officials scrambled to destroy evidence and silence witnesses. Their own chief constructor had warned them repeatedly that this ship would kill her crew. They had ignored him. They had overruled him. And when the time came to assign blame, the men who had been right would be punished, while the men who had been wrong would escape. That cover-up would cast a shadow over every warship built in the following years. It would make members of Parliament stand in the House of Commons and demand the scrapping of ships before they even touched water. It would turn the Royal Navy's most advanced vessel into its most controversial. And it would take 3 decades of faultless service to prove what the engineering had shown from the beginning. This is the story of HMS Devastation, the cursed warship that changed naval warfare forever. To understand why Devastation was condemned before launch, you need to understand the politics that killed the captain. The story begins with a fundamental argument about how warships should be designed in the age of iron and steam. In the 1860s, the Royal Navy was struggling to reconcile 2 revolutionary technologies. Armored iron hulls had made wooden warships obsolete overnight. Rotating gun turrets promised to concentrate massive firepower in a way broadside batteries never could. The question was how to combine them without creating a floating death trap. The traditional approach mounted turrets on a conventional hull with a full sailing rig. Ships like HMS Monarch carried their guns high above the waterline, protected by thick armor, with masts and sails providing reliable propulsion when coal ran short. This was conservative. This was safe. This was what the Admiralty's chief constructor, Edward James Reed, designed and supported. Captain Cowper Coles had different ideas. Coles was a naval officer, not a trained engineer, but he had pioneered the rotating turret during the Crimean War and become a celebrity for it. He believed turrets should be mounted as low as possible on a ship's deck, reducing the profile presented to enemy fire. His designs featured minimal freeboard, the distance from waterline to deck, combined with a full sailing rig that he considered essential for any seagoing vessel. Reed examined Coles's blueprints in his drawing office at the Admiralty and saw disaster waiting to happen. A low freeboard ship carrying heavy masts and yards created a lethal combination. When such a vessel heeled in heavy seas, water would wash across the deck. The weight of the masts would resist any return to upright. The mathematics were unforgiving. Reed calculated that the captain would reach her maximum stability at a heel of only 21 degrees. Beyond that angle, she would continue rolling until she capsized. There would be no recovery. Reed put these concerns in writing. He refused to approve Coles's design. He wrote formal memoranda to his superiors warning them explicitly that the proposed vessel was unsafe for ocean service. The Admiralty overruled him. Hugh Childers, the First Lord of the Admiralty, had become personally invested in Coles's approach. Coles had cultivated powerful supporters in Parliament and the press, running what amounted to a public relations campaign against the Admiralty's own technical staff. The campaign for his turret ships had become a matter of national pride. Childers championed the Captain project over the objections of his own experts. going so far as to transfer his 18-year-old son Leonard to serve aboard her as a midshipman. Vice Admiral Sir Spencer Robinson, the controller of the Navy, supported Reed's assessment. Robinson was the professional head of naval construction. He told the Admiralty that the captain's design was dangerous and recommended retiring her after a single trial cruise. His warnings were noted in official correspondence and ignored in official decisions. When the Captain was finally completed at the Laird shipyard in Birkenhead in January 1870, she exceeded her designed displacement by 735 tons. Her freeboard measured just 6.5 feet, less than half what HMS Monarch achieved with her more conventional design. The overweight condition came directly from the masts and rigging that Coles insisted upon. The very features meant to make her seaworthy had made her a death trap. Reed resigned as chief constructor in July 1870, 2 months before the disaster. He had spent 4 years warning that this ship would kill her crew. The Admiralty had spent 4 years ignoring him. But proving that Captain was doomed was only half the battle. Reed's real vindication would take another 3 years, and it would come from the very ship that Parliament wanted destroyed before she ever left Portsmouth Harbor. On the 6th of September 1870, the Captain capsized exactly as Reed had predicted. The court-martial that followed produced a verdict that should have ended careers. The judges found that the ship had been built in deference to public opinion and in opposition to the views and opinions of the controller and his department. The professional experts had been right. The politicians had been wrong. 480 men had paid for the mistake with their lives. What happened next revealed the true nature of the Admiralty's character. Rather than accept responsibility, Hugh Childers published a 359-page memorandum blaming Vice Admiral Robinson, the very man who had warned against the ship. Robinson, who had been right about everything, was forced into retirement in February 1871. Childers himself resigned the following month, citing ill health rather than acknowledging any fault in his judgment. The man who had championed the deadly ship and lost his own son aboard it chose to destroy the career of the man who had tried to stop him. Reed, watching from outside government, saw his warnings vindicated and his allies punished. The Admiralty had learned nothing from 480 deaths except how to assign blame to the innocent. Meanwhile, another ship was taking shape in the covered slipways at Portsmouth Dockyard. HMS Devastation had been laid down on the 12th of November, 1869, 10 months before the Captain disaster. She represented Reed's answer to every flaw in Coles's design. Where Captain tried to combine turrets with sailing rig, Devastation eliminated masts entirely. Where Captain's low freeboard combined fatally with her top-heavy rigging, Devastation's freeboard rose to nearly 11 feet after Reed ordered modifications following the disaster. Where Captain reached maximum stability at 21 degrees of heel, Devastation's calculations showed she would remain stable past 57 degrees. The numbers told the story. Devastation displaced 9,330 tons. Her hull measured 285 feet between perpendiculars, with a beam of 62 feet 3 inches. She carried 4 12-inch muzzle-loading rifles in 2 twin turrets arranged along the center line, each turret protected by 14 inches of wrought iron armor. Her waterline belt measured 12 inches thick. Her deck had 3 inches of iron plating, and it pioneered the concept of horizontal armor protection that would become standard on every subsequent warship. 2 Pentrunk engines driving twin screws produced 6,637 indicated horsepower, pushing her to nearly 14 knots on trials. Her bunkers held between 1,300 and 1,600 tons of coal, giving her a cruising range of 5,570 nautical miles at 10 knots. She needed no sails. She needed no masts. She was designed from the keel up as a pure steam warship, and Parliament wanted her destroyed before she ever put to sea. On the 3rd of April, 1873, the House of Commons erupted in debate over the new vessel. Lord Henry Lennox rose to question whether the First Lord of the Admiralty would send his own family to sea aboard Devastation, a pointed reference to the Childers tragedy. He noted that her displacement had increased by 527 tons since her original design, while her coal capacity had decreased by 300 tons. These were the same warning signs that had preceded the Captain disaster. Mr. Bentinck rose next, his voice carrying across the chamber. He said the ship was too large for coast defense and not suitable for seagoing. He demanded to know whether any responsible naval commander would risk taking such a vessel into the open Atlantic, or whether she would spend her career cowering in harbor while Britain's enemies laughed at her impotence. George Goschen, the new First Lord, defended his ship with the only weapon that mattered against political hysteria: data. He told Parliament that no ship had ever been submitted to a more searching investigation than HMS Devastation. The Committee on Designs had examined every aspect of her construction. Independent naval architects had reviewed her stability calculations. Sea trials had demonstrated her capabilities in conditions more severe than normal operations would require. He said she had fighting powers that no ship had had before. That was Goshen's answer to the critics. Devastation might not cross oceans under sail like the ships of Nelson's era, but she could destroy any vessel afloat while remaining essentially invulnerable to return fire. If you are finding this interesting, consider subscribing to the channel. We cover the engineering stories behind British military history. It helps us keep making these videos. Now, let us continue. The real test came when Devastation actually went to sea. Her first extended voyage took her across the Bay of Biscay, the same waters off Cape Finisterre where the Captain had operated before her loss. The conditions were miserable, seas running 20 to 26 feet, with winds that would have tested any vessel afloat. Devastation rolled only 14 degrees. Where Captain had reached her limits at 21 degrees and capsized, Devastation barely moved. The low silhouette critics feared proved to be an advantage. Without tall masts to catch the wind, she rode low and stable through Atlantic swells that would have sent older ships staggering. Her crew reported that she handled better in rough weather than ships with twice her freeboard. The transit silenced the loudest critics. Here was proof that Reed's mathematics had been correct. A ship designed without sails could cross oceans. A ship with armored turrets could maintain fighting capability in conditions that would disable conventional battleships. The cursed vessel was proving herself everything her designer had promised. Comparative trials against HMS Agincourt and HMS Sultan in mid-1873 produced data that embarrassed the skeptics further. In identical sea conditions, Devastation performed slightly better in both pitch and roll than her conventional counterparts. A stability test conducted in harbor had 400 men run back and forth across her deck 18 times. The ship heeled only 7 degrees. The mathematics of her design had been vindicated by the physics of her performance. Service followed service. HMS Devastation deployed to the Mediterranean Fleet in October 1873, operating from the anchorage at Malta alongside more conventional warships. She participated in fleet exercises, showed the flag at foreign ports, and demonstrated that her unusual design created no operational limitations. Officers who had refused to serve aboard her now requested transfers to her crew. The vessel that Parliament had wanted scrapped became one of the most sought-after postings in the fleet. Her combat record was unremarkable because it was unnecessary. Devastation served during an era of relative peace for the Royal Navy. She never fired her 12-inch guns in anger, but her presence mattered. Foreign naval attaches observed her capabilities and reported to their own admiralties in St. Petersburg, Rome, and Berlin. The ship that Britain had almost destroyed before commissioning was teaching the world how battleships should be built. The modernization program of 1890 to 1892 extended her capabilities further. Triple expansion engines replaced the original compound machinery in the engine rooms, improving both efficiency and reliability. Breech-loading 10-inch guns replaced the muzzle loaders in her turrets, dramatically increasing rate of fire. The 30-year-old hull proved sound enough to accept modifications that kept her relevant against ships built a generation later. When King Edward VII held his coronation fleet review at Spithead in August 1902, HMS Devastation steamed in formation with the most modern vessels the Royal Navy possessed. She had outlived every ship that critics had compared her to. She had outlived the men who had demanded her destruction. She had outlived 2 complete generations of warship design and remained capable of taking her place in the line of battle. The Admiralty finally paid off Devastation in 1908, 35 years after her commissioning. She was sold for scrap in May of that year, her hull still sound, her reputation transformed from national embarrassment to founding ancestor of the modern battleship. Her image had appeared on boxes of England's glory matches since 1891, an unlikely memorial for a ship once called a floating coffin. The legacy extended far beyond British waters. Within months of Devastation's successful trials, foreign navies began copying her layout. Edward Reed himself traveled to St. Petersburg in June 1871 to consult on the design of Peter Veliky, Russia's first mastless ocean-going ironclad. Italy built the Duilio class with its massive 100-ton guns. Germany produced the Sachsen class for Baltic operations. China ordered the Dingyuan class from German shipyards, directly copying the configuration that Devastation had pioneered. Every major naval power recognized that the future had arrived in the form of a flat-decked, turreted steam-powered warship without a single mast or yard of canvas. France alone held out, constrained by her lack of global coaling stations, but even Paris eventually abandoned sail for capital ships in the 1880s. The configuration that Devastation pioneered, twin centerline turrets, armored superstructure, pure steam propulsion, became the standard that every subsequent battleship would follow. HMS Dreadnought, the revolutionary vessel that made every other warship obsolete when she launched in 1906, was the direct descendant of the design philosophy that Reed had established in 1869. The line ran clear from Devastation through to the battleships that fought at Jutland and beyond. Consider what Devastation's story reveals about the relationship between engineering and politics in Victorian Britain. Reed had been right about Captain. He had put his concerns in writing. He had risked his career to oppose a popular project backed by powerful interests in Parliament and the press. When disaster proved him correct, the Admiralty blamed him for not being more insistent in his warnings. He had also been right about Devastation. He had designed a revolutionary vessel that broke every convention of naval architecture. He had calculated her stability, specified her armor, balanced her armament. When critics demanded her destruction, the mathematics eventually vindicated him completely. Reed resigned from government service after Captain's loss, but continued as a naval architect and later served in Parliament himself, making over 6,000 contributions to debates between 1874 and 1906. He lived until 1906, long enough to see Devastation's design philosophy triumph completely, long enough to watch foreign navies copy the ship he had built, long enough to be vindicated by 4 decades of service from a vessel that politicians had wanted to scrap before she was commissioned. He received a knighthood and fellowship of the Royal Society, but the institutional lesson was never properly learned. The men who had ignored his warnings about Captain faced no consequences beyond slightly early retirement. The men who had demanded Devastation's destruction faced no consequences at all. The conspiracy of silence that had cost 480 lives was never properly exposed until academic historians began examining the archives in the 20th century. The first popular account did not appear until 1963. The first comprehensive academic study was published only in 2020, 150 years after the disaster. Devastation herself became the answer to Captain's failure. One designer, 2 ships, opposite fates. One built to please politicians and newspaper editors, the other built to please physics and mathematics. One capsized in her first year of service. The other served for 35 years and founded a dynasty of warships. The cursed ship that everyone expected to sink proved that the real curse had been political interference in engineering decisions. The vessel that Parliament feared became the vessel that every navy on Earth copied. The floating coffin became the foundation of modern naval architecture. 35 years of service, 0 combat losses, no major accidents. Outlived every critic who demanded her destruction. Template for every battleship that followed. That was British engineering. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Leave a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Our community stretches across the entire world. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Click the video on the left to watch this ugly ship destroy a whole fleet.